Indeed, we gather here on this second Sunday of Lent, clearly referencing the Transfiguration. And in my prayer this week, it became clear to me that I needed to be transfigured. I needed to have a different approach to my thinking, to my way of being in Lent on pilgrimage. And what I did is I began to think of Lent more as a nation retreat than a series of days. And at least in my experience with many men and women who have directed me and I've directed on the spiritual exercises, in a shortened version, perhaps in the summers, the question at the beginning of the retreat is always, what do you desire? What would you most like from God? It's a very different question than what have you given up or what have you taken on? This Lent, what do you desire most deeply and profoundly from God? I'm hoping that my answer might have echoes and resonance in you. For me, the answer was, I desire most deeply at this time to have yet another personal encounter with God and to be filled with hope. A personal encounter with God yet again and be filled with hope. And immediately, of course, upon offering that, I turn to, if God is for us, who can be against? God who did not spare God's Son, but handed him over for us all, how will he not give us everything along with him? What an extraordinary proclamation. If God is for us, who can be against? I'd like to share a little bit more of the context, some comments on the reading, and then end this homily as I would end an Ignatian retreat. The context. I don't know about you, but there's part of me that really has had enough of the pandemic and the virus. Basically, a year in, I have virus fatigue. I'm sick of it all. And this week in particular, for some reason, I felt a lot of intense isolation from people. And so some of you may know that I teach high school at Loyola Blakefield. And so one of those isolations that comes quickly to mind is the division in our student body. I'm told I'm now doing concurrent learning. I don't think it's called hybrid anymore. It's called concurrent. So while I have students in front of me via the computer as we are now, there are students at home. And we are concurrently learning. But the sadness and the isolation comes from that we are divided. The A to K, which are the blue people, never meet the gold people that are L to Z. And so for a whole year now, if you are in A to K and your friend's name begins with a P, a Q, or an R, you haven't seen them in the class. Incredible isolation. I miss seeing that. I miss having them together. And so then we add the masks. I'm very sad and isolated that I can't see people's smiles. I can't see people's scowls. It helps engage me in so many ways, in the classroom, and yes, in preaching, and in so many places, but it is masked. It is covered. You too have had your own isolations. Whether it's the inability to touch and reach out to the people you would most want to visit, to dine with, to share the fullness of Eucharist in community. So much is isolating. And yet I still return to that holy desire for encounter with God and hope. So yes, the vaccine gives us hope. Yes, the lightening of days, which you have not noticed are getting longer and longer, gives us hope. The melting of snow gives us hope. But really, what gives hope is, if God is for us, who can be against? Who did not spare his own son, but handed him over for us all. How will he not give us everything? Everything. A couple comments on the readings. The first reading, this incredibly powerful story of Abraham and the possible sacrifice of Isaac. One of the things that struck me was the complete difference when Abraham hears the voice of God versus when Adam and Eve heard the voice of God. When they were in the garden and Adam and Eve had eaten of the fruit and heard the voice of God, they ran, they hid. Here, without a moment's hesitation, God calls Abraham, and Abraham says, "Here I am," raising his hand. Here I am. In complete trust, obedience, if you will, and docility. He does not know what the Lord is now going to ask of him with this possible sacrifice of Isaac. But it doesn't matter. He is with the beloved, and he can trust fully. And that trust leads through this transformation of the sacrifice of the ram. And that incredible trust and dependence is rewarded when God says to him, "I myself declare to you, your descendants will be more numerous than the stars in the sky, than the sand on the seashore." And so it is. And so are we, descendants of Abraham, one of those stars, one of those grains of sand. What a cause for hope. From the one who is old, from the one who is barren, from the one who may have had to sacrifice his son, with trust in God, hope returns again. And so we turn to the gospel. I suspect many of you may have been at the Lectio yesterday with Bonnie Thurston, and she referenced so many homilies that have been said on all of these things. But one of the things she didn't say that struck me was this. So yes, Peter, James, and John are on the mountaintop. They're on retreat, if you will, with the Lord. And Jesus is transfigured. And Elijah and Moses are with Jesus conversing. My question to you this day is, what do you think they were talking about? What could have possibly been that conversation? I think it is clear. It was about hope. It was about what the Son would undergo in the coming weeks and months, leading to the resurrection and the life returning, to the healing of the people, a conversation of hope. And of course, Peter doesn't know what he's saying, but wants to remain there on the mountaintop, as we want to remain whenever we have a profound spiritual experience. We don't want to move away. We want to savor it. We want to be patient with it. We want to delight in it. And the revelation, "This is my beloved, listen to him." And so the gospel reading is also about seeing in a new way and hearing in a new way. What stops us from seeing God's glory this day? Is it our lack of hope? Is it sin? Is it brokenness? Do we allow the coronavirus to have such power that we can no longer see and celebrate? What stops us from hearing God's voice this day? To our sins and our weakness, our need to choose self, our pity, Our own brokenness keep us from hearing. But yet we are still invited to see and hear in new ways, to be transfigured, each of us, as we become deeply aware of parts of us that are united with God and parts that are divided. But through it all, we're not left alone. For if God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but handed him over for us all, how will he not give us everything? And so what is our response to the mountaintop experience? A return to the ending of the spiritual exercises, the ending of the retreat, where Ignatius invites the retreatant and us this day to recognize that all is gift, and to paraphrase, take, Lord, receive all my liberty, my memory, my understanding. You have given all to me, and now I return it. Give me only your love and your grace. That's enough for me. If God is for us, who can be against us? God did not spare his own son, but handed over him for us. How will he now not give us everything? Receive everything this day.